Good afternoon, participants. Along with my Senior Vice President, Mr. Purnachandra, I'm delighted to welcome you all to the interactive webinar with Edgard Kagan, Deputy Chief of Mission, US Embassy, New Delhi. Dear Edgard, it is a pleasure to welcome you to this interactive session with all our IACC members. For our audience, I have to introduce you, give a formal introduction. Edgard Kagan assumed the position of Deputy Chief of Mission in New Delhi on July 31st, 2019, after serving 2 years as the US Consul General in Mumbai. He served previously as Deputy Chief of Mission of the US Embassy in Malaysia, Deputy Director of the US Mission to the UN's Washington office, and as Deputy Assistant Secretary in the Bureau of East Asian Pacific Affairs. A Foreign Service officer since 1991, he served at US embassies in Australia, China, Israel, Hungary, and the Ivory Coast. He also served as Director of Korean Affairs and had tours of duty in the Office of Chinese and Mongolian Affairs, as well as on the policy planning staff. In 1989, graduate cum laude of Yale University, Edgard worked for the New York City Bureau of Bridges prior to joining the State Department. He speaks French and Mandarin Chinese, as well as some Hungarian and Spanish. Born and raised in the Chicago area, Edgard Kagan is married to Cynthia Gill and has 3 children. Now, as far as our interaction with you all, I have something to say.
This off. I think you don't need it, I guess, here in the meeting.
No, I have something to say about Indo-American Chamber. I just kept this paper aside somewhere. I have a lot of questions for you, which are coming up here on my face. I'm trying to see the right one. Okay. Sorry for that, friends. I've known Edgard from the moment he came to Mumbai as the US Consul General in Mumbai. From the beginning, his approachability and warmth makes you feel like he's an old friend, and he has always been supportive of IACC and even other organizations with his vast experience and authenticity to bond US and India in multiple platforms, local, national, and global. Edgard, since my election as the President of IACC and your elevation to Deputy Chief of Mission, US Embassy, I've had the pleasure of meeting you in Delhi. Since then, I had a desire to invite you to meet with our members and share your vision to the US, India business and investment space. I believe that by exploring synergies and facilitating trade and investment, the relationship between both our countries will strengthen, as India would soon be, hopefully, the 3rd largest economy in the world. I'm proud to share this virtual platform with you and want to thank the Minister of Council for Commercial Affairs, Eileen Nandi, for giving us this opportunity. Everyone knows that India and USA are natural allies. Leaders of both our countries, both political as well as business, have always had a strong bond of trust and friendship. There are positive indications that the emerging geopolitical developments might make India a preferred destination for some of the high-end technology companies from US and to relocate their operations to India from China. Some global companies like Apple have already laid out its roadmap, and we understand and hope more would follow. Facebook's investment in Reliance Jio platforms, along with KKR, General Atlantic, and Silver Lake Partners, we hope is the first of many such symbolic partnerships. Wow. I'm losing track of my own work. India was ranked 63rd among 190 countries in the World Bank's Ease of Doing Business ranking report. The leap of 14 places from 2018 puts India among the top improvers in rank yet again. We would like to hear from you what more we have to do to take this economic partnership to the next stage. We have developed numerous partnerships, one of the most valuable of which is certainly a partnership with the US diplomatic mission in India. US and India have been engaged in dialogues in various platforms such as the 2+2 Ministerial, the India-US Commercial Dialogue, the CEO Forum, and Indo-US High Technology Cooperation Group. Our members have evinced keen interest in hearing from you about these initiatives. As we would like the US and India to grow their natural friendship to much larger economic ties, we would like to have your insight on where we can grow, what we lack, and what we should do to improve these difficult times and an opportunity for growth in future. Edgard, may I now request you to tell us about your vision?
Thank you so much, Rajyalakshmi. And again, thank you to my friends at the Indo-American Chamber of Commerce. I was saying before we went on with everyone else, one of the very first things I did when I arrived in Mumbai in August of 2017 was attend an IACC event and then the annual convention. And I think that really opened my eyes and was extremely valuable to giving me insights into the US-India relationship, but also it built relationships that have really given me insights into what's happening in India and helped me understand. So I'm very grateful because everywhere I've gone, I've always found discussions with the IACC to be very useful, and I really feel very grateful for the friendships that I've made through the IACC. I think the first thing to do is to start off by just acknowledging the need to be humble. 4 months ago, I certainly would not have predicted what's happened. I think very few people would have. And I think that we are in the middle of something that is really unprecedented in the certainly post-World War II era in terms of global upheaval. I mean, if you think about what the world is going through now, there is far more uncertainty, I would argue, than at any comparable period that I can think of, including the end of the Cold War, the immediate post-September 11th period, the global financial crisis. All of those had very frightening and very concerning elements, or elements of significant change and uncertainty, but nothing that is as broad and wide-ranging as what we're dealing with now. So I think that it's really important to recognize that in the same way that 4 months ago, I don't think many people predicted that we'd be where we are now. It is very, very risky to make any predictions about where we're going to be 4 months from now, to say nothing of 4 years from now. At the same time, I think that there are a couple of things that are pretty consistent. I mean, one is that, and I mean, I'll be honest and say it was a little disappointing for us at the U.S. mission because we were involved with what we believed was a very successful visit by President Trump in February. Normally, after a visit like that, you get to bask in the sort of afterglow a little bit, and everyone's sort of in a good mood, and it opens doors, and you get to try and make progress on things. Instead, we went almost immediately, it certainly to us felt like it was immediately, into worrying about COVID and how the world was going to deal with this, how India was going to deal with it, how we at the US mission were going to deal with it. So, in a way, we sort of got cheated of that warm afterglow. On the other hand, you see the benefits of that visit in the sense that we have had much better cooperation and coordination with the government of India in the sort of COVID period, dealing with the COVID crisis, than I would have dared to predict. And I think that it reflects a decision by the leaders in both of our countries that has been communicated very clearly to our governments of the importance of the relationship. And so I'm very happy about the level of cooperation that we've had. And I think that it's worth noting that if we're able to find ways to work together at moments of great stress and pressure on both of our countries, that bodes very well for our ability to work together at other times. And I think that, you know, the fact that we've been able to find ways for the US to provide support to India, for India to provide support for the United States, to work together to get Americans from India to the United States, to get Indians from the United States to India, I think all those things really reflect a growing maturity in the relationship and a recognition that both of us, both countries, have a very strong interest in expanding our cooperation. I think that the fact that this is happening against the backdrop of tremendous global uncertainty only strengthens the arguments for why it is in both of our interests to find ways to work together. I mean, the truth is that, you know, global institutions are being stretched and under strain right now in a way that is, you know, I believe unprecedented. And when you're going through something like this, what you realize is the value of having trusted partners. That doesn't mean that you're going to agree on everything. It doesn't mean that there won't be areas of disagreement. But I think that, to me at least, it means that you have partners with whom you have some confidence about common underlying goals and common ways of looking at the world that allow you to find ways to manage disagreements. And I believe that we are in the process of building that now. I mean, I don't want to say that it's done because, first of all, I'm not sure it'll ever be completely done, but also we still are in the middle of the great political and economic and human stresses on both of our countries. And so I think that it's very difficult to predict with certainty where things are going to go, either in the United States or India, to say nothing of the rest of the world. At the same time, the underlying drivers, I think, that were there before have been strengthened. The development of the political relationship and the strengthening of the relationship between leaders, I think a growing recognition in both countries of the importance of the US-India relationship goes on top of the very strong people-to-people ties, the extensive US investment in India, the extensive trade ties between the United States and India, the way in which I think, you know, Americans have had tremendous influence in India through the Indians who've gone to study and work in the United States and then have come back and set up companies or gone to work in companies, which I think has led to a significant change over the years in the tenor of the relationship. I think that the US and Indian companies that do business with each other have been real drivers in this. And that's one reason why I'm so grateful to the IACC and to all of the members, because I do think that the strongest force we have in the relationship right now is not national interest. So I think national interest is very powerful. It is the people-to-people ties that have been built up over a long period of time. And within that, the business ties and the Indian companies that do business with the US and vice versa are a very, very important factor. So I'm very optimistic that even though I can't tell you what is going to happen, and I'm very reluctant to make any predictions, given that, as I said, no one saw this coming, I am very confident that we'll find ways to work together more. And I think that the opportunities in the relationship for businesses on both sides are going to grow. I think that what is very clear is that there are tremendous economic ties between our countries already that help reinforce and cement the opportunities to build new ties and new connections. And I do think that American companies increasingly understand India, or maybe understand is too strong, they think they understand India, and recognize the importance of India in the longer term in whatever industry they're in. I think Indian companies are by and large very familiar with the United States and understand increasingly the value of doing business with the US. And I'm personally quite optimistic as a result of the significant increase in Indian investment over the years in the United States, as I think Indian companies realize that there's a benefit to strengthening their ability to do business in the United States by investing there, in the same way that American companies over the years have felt that investing in India is a way to strengthen their business opportunities here. I think, just to give a very quick overview of some of the things that we've been doing in the COVID period. I mean, one is obviously repatriating Americans and residents of the United States. And that was very complicated because of the lockdown, as all of you know. But we managed to work very closely with the Indian government. And in the end, I think it was a successful effort. And we got almost 6,000 Americans back. India is now bringing people from the US to India. And I think that that's going fairly well, though, I think that it's marginally easier because the lockdown restrictions in the US are much less strict than they were in India when we were doing our flights in the other direction. I think that there's been a lot of cooperation in a variety of areas, including nuts and bolts health cooperation that's long-standing. Our U.S. Agency for International Development has long-standing partnerships with Indian health organizations ranging from government and non-government. Our Centers for Disease Control and Prevention work very closely with their Indian counterparts and have been very active in responding to COVID-19. We have expanded our assistance to India in specialized areas dealing with the COVID-19 response, but also I think that there's been a great deal of collaboration between scientists in both countries. I think that we are working to support private sector health organizations through creative financing that is being supported by our U.S. Agency for International Development. And I think that we're working to make sure that India has access to American technology on things like ventilators to the extent that they're needed. I think that the other thing is that what we're seeing is the benefit of the partnerships we've built over the years. I mean, the truth is that one of the reasons the U.S. and India have worked well together in dealing with COVID is because we have had extensive cooperation on health going back, 3 decades and more. And so what we see is that the relationships and partnerships we build become useful down the road, even if it's on issues that we never really imagined at the time that we were first starting on building the partnerships. I think the other thing we've worked with India is on areas in which our economies are very intertwined. As you know, many American companies have back office functions that are operated out of India and business processing facilities. There is a very close linkage between the operations and support operations for a lot of different American financial institutions that come out of India. And that's something that we had to work very closely with the Indian government to get exemptions in some cases on lockdown restrictions, because there were operations of American companies in India that were absolutely critical to their ability to conduct their essential functions in the United States. And we actually have a very productive relationship both with the center and also with the states. We've worked on making sure that each side has access to medical and pharmaceutical supplies from the other. And this is something that is inherently fraught with peril at a time when both countries are feeling under great pressure. But overall, I think we've been quite successful in making sure that the interests of both countries have been addressed. And we're very grateful to our Indian partners for that. I think there's a great deal of concern and opportunity at the same time about what economic changes are going to come out of that. I mean, it's a short term, and there's no question, at least in my view, that the trade relationship is going to take a hit, if only because demand has gone down very significantly in both countries. Processing at ports and things like that's undoubtedly been slowed. So I expect that we're going to see significant declines in the bilateral trade, but that's going to be true with virtually every country in the world. I can't imagine a lot of places that won't have that. I think that the key is sort of what are the longer term trends and how do we continue to ensure that the supply chains that American companies have that involve India and places where American companies have business processing and outsourcing operations in India are able to provide the support that they need, and that Indians who are doing business with the US and depending on imports from the United States or exports to the United States are still able to do that as we move to some resumption of more normal economic activity. I think it's also worth noting that, COVID continues to be a very serious problem in both our countries. The U.S. obviously has the most cases in the world, and while the growth has more or less stabilized, the truth is it's stabilized at a much higher level than we would like to see. India, which I think was effective in slowing the initial impact of COVID still is dealing with significant increases, which are going to stretch Indian capacity to deal with this. At the same time that the government is trying to gingerly and cautiously, have restart some economic activity. So there's going to be major challenges there. I think that the key thing in terms of what we do at the embassy, and I think for those of you who are interested in the U.S.-India relationship, is making sure that we're able to work together and be candid and build on the partnerships that we've been able to develop. One area in which we've been able to do that is talking with India and other like-minded countries about ways to respond to the uncertainty and to the challenges that COVID is posing to the world, both in the Indo-Pacific region and globally, finding ways to work together productively in international fora such as the United Nations or the World Health Organization. And I think that we've made a lot of progress on that really is a reflection of the trust that has been built up between both governments. So with that, I have a bunch of questions, and one of them has to do with the ability to travel to the U.S. When will we start issuing visas? What's the prognosis for Make in India and integrating greater integration of U.S. companies that may be leaving China to encourage them to come to India? On travel, what I'll say is right now we are only issuing emergency visas, and very, very few of those. The threshold is quite high. And this is a global thing around the world. U.S. embassies and consulates are not issuing visas except in exceptional circumstances. The move from that will be driven by a number of things. First and foremost, by guidance from Washington. Also, what are the local circumstances? I mean, we do not want to be in a situation where our actions put people at risk by encouraging people to come to our facilities and potentially be crammed together as they're waiting. So we're working to make sure that if and when we start to do services to the public, that we'll be able to ensure social distancing and that it will not be dangerous for people to come to our facilities. I think that on the economic opportunities and challenges, I mean, look, I think that the truth is it's very, very hard to make any predictions right now, because I think that virtually every country is wrestling with a similar sets of goals and challenges. Virtually every country in the world wants to reduce its dependence on global supply chains where it feels that there's uncertainty or risk. An example of that is medical supplies and PPE, where I think many countries are very eager to find ways to make sure they can produce what they need. At the same time, I think that many countries recognize that there's a zero-sum game quality to that. If everybody produces PPE to make sure that they have the ability to do it in case there's an emergency, it means that some people will be paying a lot more than they should perhaps for PPE. And it works against the idea of moving supply to places where it's the most efficient. And I think that, what I would say, I mean, very bluntly, is that while there are many companies who are looking to reduce their footprint and reduce their dependence on China, I think that they are all waiting to see what policies emerge from different countries before they make real commitments to where they're going to go. And the reason for that is I think that countries adopt a more protectionist approach, that there will be a reluctance to be in a place that might be vulnerable to that. And so I think that the challenges are going to be to make sure that as we look to where the world goes, that we're thinking about the idea of trusted partners, that inevitably there will be the need for countries to be somewhat integrated into global supply chains. I don't think that that is going to disappear, but there'll probably be a reduction in the extent of global supply chains. It used to be that the idea of maximizing revenue meant that a relatively small differential made it viable to move your production. I suspect that that's going to be less true. So I think the challenge for India right now is not that there are companies that want to move out of China. It's what does it take to encourage them to move to India? And I think that some of the questions that I've been asked for this are, what are the things India needs to do to attract them? And I think that they continue to be the same things as before. Ease of doing business is very important. And as Rajyalakshmi said, there's been real progress in India, though I suspect that there is not a single one of you who does business here who won't say that there is room to improve ease of doing business even more. There's also, I think, the need to be very frank about, what it takes for companies to come here. Ease of doing business is one thing. Predictability and stability on policies are another. Many companies, certainly American companies, have told me that they would rather have policies that they don't like, that are very predictable and stable, because then they can plan then frequent changes, even if some of the changes are in directions that they want. Because the frequent changes, if it can change in the direction I want with no warning, it also can change the other direction with no warning. And what companies are looking for is stability and predictability. I think also reducing the regulatory burden, which is part of ease of doing business, but I would say is also part of changing the mentality of how business and government interact with each other. And I think that it's also important to allow imports. I think very frankly, the idea that companies are going to suddenly move every element of production to India and then export from India, I think is very unrealistic. I think that there's still going to be supply chains, even if companies are trying to reduce their dependence on supply chains. That's not something that's done in a 1-year period. And I think that if India really wants to attract companies that will come here and set up in India and export from India, it's got to make it easier to import into India, which will be a challenge in the current environment. So with that, let me just turn it over to you, Rajyalakshmi. I'm happy. I've got a list of questions here, but I'm happy to answer, to give you a chance to ask a few and let you moderate this.
Okay. I agree. What you said is very right. Everybody's looking for some stability in our policies and predictions as to what the future is going to be from the government side. And we agree that we need to make this better. The questions are like some of them. I think some we have sent it, but some I'm just reporting here. One, Mr. Arvind Brara. Do you see a growing collaboration between US companies and service providers from India for IT and ITES services?
I think that there's already a great deal of integration. I think that if you look closely at the IT and IT services sector, what you can see is that Indian and American companies work very closely going in both directions. And when you look at the tech sector on a broader scale in India, there's a huge amount of investment from American companies. There's a lot of business that's done with the United States. So I think that, yes, there's going to be more. At the same time, I think that, there's no question that people are going to be re-looking at some of the models, if only because, what we're doing now shows that perhaps you can do more things remotely, that there are technological ways of addressing problems that may change some of the business models that have driven a lot of the growth in the sector over the last 15 or 20 years. So I think in the broad sense, I'm pretty optimistic. I think in a more narrow sense, I think that there will be changes to the model, and some of them will be quite disruptive.
And another question from Mr. Jagdish Mitra. He's from Tech Mahindra. He says the education and intern program can be enhanced for us academic institutions to partner with Indian peers of theirs so that we can build talent which is in tune with US markets and raises the level of academics. The intern program in the post-COVID world can be from India as well as remotely. Will help both the countries.
Look, I think that there's a lot of truth to that. I think that, one of the challenges, obviously, is education writ large is going through a tremendous amount of stress. And I think you've all seen universities around the world are wrestling with, will they open? How will they open? Will it be in person? Will it be remote? And I think that that's likely to continue for some time. And obviously, if that happens, that also has ripple effects that flow to internships and postgraduate training programs. So I think that flexibility is going to be key. I think that finding ways to allow people to have opportunities to learn, but that recognize that it's going to be very hard to be confident that we'll all be physical, I think are going to be very important.
There's another from Anupam Bora. Do you see governments lifting the compulsory quarantine on entry into their respective boundaries anytime soon? If they don't, this will act as a great deterrent to business and the travel and hospitality.
I think that we're seeing this play out now in real time. I think some countries are making it easier to travel. Some have not actually put that many restrictions on. Some are making it harder. I think that, you know, until there is a widespread vaccine or cure or both, I think that there are going to be travel restrictions of some kind. I'm not sure what that means. It may just mean that tickets will be more expensive because there'll be fewer flights. It may be that countries will, you know, have their own quarantine requirements, which obviously India does. The United States does not, as on a national level, though some states do in the U.S. And so I think that, you know, this is still a work in progress, and a lot is going to depend on what happens to different countries that have tried different approaches. I mean, look, there are countries which are more flexible and have avoided more rigid approaches. There are some that have been a lot stricter. We'll get to see which model works better. And it may be that they both work well, and maybe that they both work badly. But as we get more information, I think that'll help shape what countries do. And I agree that, you know, travel is going to be a huge, huge deterrent to doing new business. I think that what we've all learned in this period of doing things by, you know, different tele platforms is it is very hard to develop a new relationship solely by remote ways. It's one thing to keep in touch with people that you know, but it is much, much harder to do a business deal that depends on a relationship with someone when you haven't met the person in the flesh. And so that's going to be a huge challenge to figure out and to sort out. And I think that the reality is it's not going to completely go away for a long time to come.
We have a question from our EC member, Dr. Shankaran. He says trade in services is done in 4 modes. One of the modes in by movement of natural persons, which requires a service provider, individual and not necessarily an employee of a company, from India to actually travel to the US to perform the service there and deliver it to the customer in the US. This requires the US to give him an appropriate visa for an individual to visit your country. Can you please let us know how many such visas were given last year under this mode of service delivery? How many such visas will you give this year under this category? He is not referring to H-1B visas that were given to employees of companies. It's a specific question.
Look, the short answer is I don't know. I think that, you know, I've got the overall numbers on H-1Bs, which is the program has been capped at 85,000 for a number of years. And of those, you know, based on past experience, probably 65 to 70% go to Indian citizens. In terms of the subcategories and the breakdowns, honestly, I'll have to get back to you, and because I don't have it at the tip of my fingers. But I think that, you know, what is clear is that there's very little movement in both directions right now. And that's going to have a big impact. So regardless of what happens in terms of the overall numbers and the caps and all that, as a practical matter, it's very hard to take advantage when people can't travel and people can't work, even if they could travel. So I think there remains to be seen what's going to happen in terms of the actual numbers, but I would argue that this year is not likely to be a year that you're going to want to see repeated. And so, you know, hopefully what we're going to end up with is a fairly significant drop in overall travel, visa issuance and things like that this year, because we've been closed for, you know, over 2 months, and I suspect that we're going to continue to be closed for some time. India is as well, by the way. And that once we go back to some variant of normal, it'll be easier to make these kinds of assessments in terms of subcategories within those people who are moving in both directions.
Another question: how can Indian and US banks collaborate to jointly sponsor large development projects in India, projects like the Mumbai port redevelopment and the Kolkata port redevelopment. Both these projects are together worth 60 billion US dollars. Can US banks help?
Look, that's a really good question. And I think that the short answer is yes. The more complicated answer is how. I think that what many of you have seen is US banks have been very interested in setting up a presence in India. Major US banks, quite a few major US banks do have a presence here. I just off the top of my head, JP Morgan, Bank of America, Citi, Morgan Stanley, all are here. And, you know, a lot of, frankly, their ability to operate here really is with the Indian regulators. So I think that there is an interest and a recognition in the value of a presence in India and engagement in India. And I think if there's good commercial opportunities, I think American banks are willing and have shown that over the years that they are willing to be part of it. I think that the key is going to be making sure that there's a business case for it that is compelling enough to get the kind of investment that's necessary, including from US banks.
Another question, 20,000 medicinal plants are grown in India, which are used in pharma and in Ayurveda. India can help grow these in US to support pharma in both the countries so that we can benefit both the countries with employment and also financially we can share it. Did you?
Yeah, I think that, look, there are opportunities here, Rajyalakshmi, and I think that the big challenge in all this is there's going to be growth in the pharma sector. I think that one of the challenges is going to be which companies are going to grow. And in particular, I think that there's a huge challenge for India in this area and a great deal of opportunity as well, in that Indian companies have been seeking to move into higher value production. But as they do that, they start to face a lot of the same constraints and challenges that multinational companies have faced for many years in terms of the amount of money it takes to develop a single drug and move it through the entire testing and approval process. So I think that there are opportunities as, you know, companies are looking at medicinal plants. There's a desire to look and see about existing drugs, can they be repurposed for other diseases. And I think that that's something where Indian companies and American companies have a lot of history working together. And I think that there's a lot of potential. But at the same time, I got to be honest and say that if India really wants to do that and become a drug developer, then it's going to have to take some concerted action on IPR standards, which, you know, to some degree, it's been moving in that direction for a while. But there's clearly a lot of issues dealing with IPR that are a real challenge for American investors and act as a bit of a deterrent. So, you know, if India wants to move in that direction, it's going to have to make some fairly significant changes in terms of how it enforces its IPR regime.
India has opened up supply of arms in defense sector and also FDI to private sector. And this is a multi-billion-dollar budget for both India. And can US work with us as JV partners? Because it's coming to private sector also.
Yeah, that's a very interesting idea. And I think that, as always, it's going to come down to what is the business case. I think that there are, as all of you know, there are a lot of American companies that are knowledgeable about India and interested in India. These include a lot of companies doing investments. You mentioned that the different companies that have investment groups that have bought into Geo recently, but there are many, many other American private equity firms, venture capital firms that have operated from India for a long time. So I think that, you know, if there's a business case, I suspect that there will be American companies that will be interested. As all of you know, what is very hard for us is that, you know, essentially we don't have our own companies as a government, and it's very hard for us to direct what American companies do. And so ultimately the way to get them to be partners is to entice them through the business fundamentals.
Okay. We shall try that. In India, 40% of our vegetables and fruits are wasted and they just rot because of inadequate cold storage facility and the new technologies. Can US provide their food preserving technology to benefit both? They can also earn by getting some returns and also
Yep.
jobs and there.
I think there's a lot of potential. I mean, look, I would argue that the issue is less technology than organizing the supply chain and of logistics. I mean, I think that, if you look closely, the technology, I think, is by and large there. It may not be available in the numbers and quantity that's necessary because of capital shortages. But I think that the real issue is building an agricultural logistics chain that is able to move food rapidly. And the reason for the wastage largely is food items aren't moved to market quickly enough, as well as obviously the lack of cold storage. And I think that in that regard, the investments by American companies such as Amazon and Walmart through the Flipkart deal are potentially very, very important, because ultimately these are global experts on how you manage supply chains and how you manage logistics operations, including moving food from rural areas to consumers. And I think that, they're getting involved will bring expertise that I think is potentially very valuable. I think that the key is to recognize that the way in which, American companies are going to invest in the rural sector is by having business opportunities with a solid business case. I mean, the truth is that, they're not going to do it because the U.S. government tells them to. And even if there were some that might, that, worked for us as contractors or something, ultimately, the people who will do the best job in terms of creating models that really work in India are going to be doing it not because they're on government contracts, but because they want to make money. So I think finding ways to open up the sector to allow investment, which I think we all agree is necessary, as well as American companies to be able to be involved in operations and logistics management, I think is absolutely critical. And I think that it would have a huge impact on reducing the wastage of food.
Another one is, offhand, I'm just asking because we are opening up MSME sector, and India, in every state, they're opening up cluster spaces where environmental clearances are given, and land and labor reforms are done. And so a lot of encouragement they're giving to MSME sector. I mean, the first time India has really opened up to MSME in a big way. Is there any chance that, the same way, you also give the same cluster spaces in US, in your various states, and we can exchange these cluster spaces to start MSMEs in India and also in US in different categories? That will really, this is just a question which is in my mind asking.
Look, I think it's a very interesting idea. One thing that's great about being in India is, unlike most other countries I've served in India, you don't have to explain the difference between the central government and the state government. And so, like in India, in the United States, there's a very, very great deal of difference between how states operate in terms of promoting investment. So my feeling is that the level at which this really is best going to be done is at the state level. And there may be a state that's interested in doing this. I think historically, because land acquisition is not particularly difficult in the United States, there has been less of a focus on providing sort of dedicated areas to foreign countries for building of facilities there. Usually what happens, and those of you who've done business in the United States, and I know that there's some people on the call who have invested in the US, and so you know this, what you do is you figure out what you need and you go out and buy it or rent it, which you can do fairly easily without having to go through approvals or a lot of approvals. And so I think we're less likely to go with the model of dedicating land or facilities to Indian MSMEs. I think the one exception to that is probably having to do with incubators and startups, but even those are rarely given completely for free. So I think that's where the challenge is going to lie. But I think that, my advice is, if you've got a model that you think will make a difference and make it easier for Indians to invest in the US, then go to different state governments and pitch them on it. Because my guess is that there will be a state government that will be eager to get some kind of investment, and which will be forthcoming.
On that line, can I now add on to something which IACC has been working on for some years on my textile forum? And Mr. Suresh Kotak is heading.
Yes.
And we have actually done a lot of work. And North Carolina and South Carolina had come and they joined us with an MOUs. And we were to go this year and go and see what are the possibilities of doing some textiles. And especially we wanted to do in man-made textiles and do something in these states for defense and various things. And we have the expertise and we have the interest, and perhaps even the investors also coming in. So as you rightly said, now the specific states are interested and we should go there and try and see how it works. And I hope it works. I mean, from what you say, we can do it. Okay, now
look, I think it's got a lot of potential, and I will say that Mr. Kotak knows a lot of people in South Carolina and North Carolina now, and I think that is, in my mind, a very classic example of ways in which companies and investors can strengthen the U.S.-India partnership. I mean, I think that his vision of how do you take advantage of the ability to produce in the U.S. By working with state governments and state officials, and doing it in a way that links the U.S. textile market and the Indian textile markets and production together, I think is really smart. And obviously, it's one thing to have the idea, and as he once cautioned me, that it's one thing to have the idea, it's another thing to get it done. But if anybody's going to get it done, I think it's Mr. Suresh Kotak. And I think that those are the kinds of opportunities to look for. I think that, again, the strength is starting by looking at the states. I think that he, part of what spurred the idea was, I can't remember, it was South Carolina and North Carolina. He attended a meeting with them and suddenly, realized there was real potential there. And so I think that's what I would encourage. That's why, we have worked very hard, and we've been very grateful to your support as well as to previous leaders of IACC to have IACC be involved with our Select USA Summit, which unfortunately this year, as you all probably know, has been canceled, or the summit at least. The Select USA goes on as a year-round venture. But I think that by one of the real advantages is giving Indian business people the opportunity to meet state officials from a wide variety of different states at one place, so that they can get a sense of what kind of incentives, what kind of programs are available for those who want to invest in the U.S.
Edgard, we were all coming on Select USA.
I know. I'm sorry. It was too good.
It's bad luck. But anyway, we are not going to stop. We are going to pursue all these things that we have in mind. Even if it's virtual interactions, we are going to do that, and we'll continue to do that. So all we require is your blessings on that, because you're a friend of
you have our blessings.
And I think
listen, I've got two colleagues who are here with me who probably have something far more useful and interesting to say than what I've said. Let me first ask Eileen Nandi, who all of you know, and who's our Minister Counselor for Commercial Affairs, if she has anything she'd like to say.
Yes, please, Eileen. Very happy to hear from you.
Thank you, Edgard. Well, I want to thank the Indo-American Chamber of Commerce. Sorry, try to get my mask off here. I want to thank you all for this great interaction, and just going back to the most recent point, thank you for your support for your companies that are investing in the United States. As Edgard mentioned, that's a key part of our people-to-people ties and our trade and commercial ties. And even though the economic future might be uncertain in the near term for most of us, it is heartening to see the Indian companies moving forward with their investments, and we hope to see more. As well as U.S. companies investing in India. So look forward to working with each of you on a company-by-company basis. And thank you, Rajyalakshmi, for your leadership to put this together.
And then why don't we just see if Matt wants to add anything?
Hi, Matt.
Once again, wanted to add my thanks to IACC. I always point out, IACC's historic role in the relationship, that you were for strong ties to between India and the United States when that sort of thinking is far from fashionable. And so, appreciate the longstanding commitment, and also, I think you play an important role, the business ecosystem, particularly given the prevalence of SMEs among your membership. Just to go back to Edgard's point about the supply chains, one point that was recently made was COVID-19 is an accelerator of trends. And so you're hearing a lot of talk about investment leaving China, and sort of now is the moment. I think there's certainly an opportunity there, but we had already been seeing investment leaving China earlier due to rising labor costs or the trade war, and India hadn't really benefited from that. And so just to kind of reiterate, we know there's likely to be an increased interest by companies, and particularly manufacturers, wanting to leave, or at the very least diversify from China. The question is whether India is able to take the actions needed to attract that investment. So far, they've lost out on most of these places like Vietnam or even Bangladesh. The reforms that were announced last week, along with some other moves like reducing corporate income taxes, are great. But I think if I was going to pick one thing to really prioritize, I think it's as DCM mentioned, it's that regulatory certainty and transparency. And the benefit of it is it's probably the cheapest thing to do.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Handing
Matt.
over to you, Rajyalakshmi.
Yes. I mean, I understand what everybody wants is to know about stability in our country and transparency, the business, and everybody wants to be able to predict. So I'm sure that is what our Indian government is working on. I mean, besides worrying about COVID situation, they're also working towards that. So I think as far as IACC is concerned, we will take these remarks that have come from you and advice, and we will also speak to our government in the capacity of IACC for furthering business opportunities between India and US. But I have this great hope, and I'm extremely optimistic that our countries will progress and we'll do amazing business. We are great partners and great democracies, and we are the biggest consumer market for you. It'll all come to us, it's a matter of time. So meanwhile, we'll set our things right, and we also want you to open doors for us a little more easily so that we can do real ease of business with happiness. And on these words, if you have anything else, Edgard, do you have anything else to say?
I do not, other than thank you, and I really appreciate again what IACC has done over the years for the relationship. I live in the house that Ambassador Bowles lived in when he was here, and when he helped spur the creation of the IACC in 1968. And so, I was thinking about that. You guys have quite a legacy, and we're very eager to continue working with you and to find ways in which we can support you. And so, if there's something we can do, I can't promise we'll do it, but please ask. And we really do want to share ideas. We benefit tremendously from everything that IACC does for us, and so we feel a tremendous responsibility as well to be as supportive as we can be.
And I would like to pass on to our Vice President, Senior Vice President, Mr. Purnachandra, to give the concluding remarks. And I would like to say thank you to Eileen and Matt for coming in and joining us in this meet, all of you. And now to Mr. Rao.
Thank you, President. I'm Purna Sorupneni, National Vice President of Indo-American Chamber of Commerce. It has been a pleasure being with all of you today and say a few words at the end of this webinar. It has been an honor to have Mr. Edgard Kagan, Deputy Chief of Mission. We are all happy to listen to Mr. Kagan's perspective. I would like to express my appreciation to all the participants for taking time out of your busy schedule duties to attend this webinar. Going to webinar should be like taking vitamins, not like taking Tylenol. I hope our webinar is one of the vitamins, not Tylenol. And I like to mention, as Mr. Kagan mentioned, the COVID cooperation is excellent. Of course, this is not the area we anticipated to cooperate, but unfortunately we are in that situation. But trusted partners should be together in bad and good times. So we are right now going a bad phase, but still we are working together. That is really good. And I like to mention few points I noted down. I mean, the advantages of doing business with India, like China to USA is 500 billion plus exports, and Europe to 300 plus billion exports. And they, I mean, from bottom ties to top IT spare parts to anywhere, they export to US and Europe. And India has that main advantages that India has is 65% of its working force is below 35 years, and availability of huge manpower, and a lot of states offer skill development programs to suit the particular industry at that point. And per capita is around $2,000, which is far less than US, I mean China capital per capita. That really is a lot of help in terms of salaries and all those things. And of course, we have great ports and great airports as far as the logistics are concerned, and power cost is very reasonable. But there are concerns. Actually, these concerns are not only for the importing industry, but even for Indian industry. That the land acquisition is a big challenge in India, and I think that the following concerns actually we want to take it to the Indian government on behalf of IACC. And I think the government should pool the land and give it to the incoming industries if someone has interest. And like China has a lot of software export zones, and they create everything in those zones, I think, including logistics, and they literally create a city there. I think India should do the same thing and just create a lot of SEZs and create both social infrastructure. I mean, social infrastructure is also very important. I think they should do that. And the labor reforms is one major area that they need to work on. And of course, everywhere we go, the one word we hear is the corruption. And well, I think that is one area, I mean, we are not proud of telling, but still, I think a lot of states are working on creating a single window mechanism, like ease of doing business through that single window, but still it is a major concern. Mr. Kagan mentioned about the regulatory burden and the policy burden, policy forwarding burden, like India is a democratic country like the United States. And so the governments keep changing every once in a while. And I think but like you mentioned, the policy should remain the same. I think we have to make sure that every time the government changes, the policies won't change. And of course, like you mentioned, the import taxes should be fair, like just like when we are exporting, whatever we are receiving, it should be matched when we are importing stuff also. So, but three major concerns is even for the Indian industry, not only the foreign industries, the bank interest is high and the availability of funds is relatively low. Even we as business people in India face that kind of problem. And of course, tax burden is there. More than the percentage of tax, it's the lack of simplicity in the tax structure. I think that's what a lot of industry is complaining. And of course, judicial, we have good judicial system, except the process is very slow. That's a major concern for a lot of people. And I think on behalf of IACC, like our president mentioned, we definitely take these concerns to appropriate authorities at the national level and state level, and we try to work on that, and we will definitely take the presentation to that to the national level, to the appropriate authorities. It is our hope that based on today's discussions, in the future, we IACC representing the business community along with US officials will be able to respond together to issues that we have in common and achieve our common objectives. Hope we had fruitful dialogue, even though 1 hour is relatively less time. But I think we did, I mean, through Q&A, you answered a lot of questions. That's really good. And like I mentioned, we on behalf of IACC definitely take all the concerns to appropriate authorities. Thank you, Mr. Kagan, for an enlightening talk and clarifying several issues through Q&A. Of course, there are a lot more questions, but I think we don't have time. That's why I think our president picked the few questions from among those questions and asked you. We owe you a special vote of thanks for being here, even though you have a very tight schedule. We, on behalf of IACC, sincerely appreciate it. And thanks to everyone. Bye for now. I'm done.
Thank you. And
Okay.
thank you.
Goodbye. Thank you all.
Bye.